So we've made it to the New Testament in our year of the Bible. Congratulations. If perhaps you fell behind in our daily reading or you've come into the life of our church since we started this journey back in September, let me encourage you, now would be a great time to jump back in to try to read through the New Testament over the course of the summer. We began our New Testament journey this week with Mark's Gospel, because Mark is the oldest of the four Gospels that we have in our Bible. And so we finally, after 9 months, we finally get to Jesus. And you may be wondering, why have we skipped all of Jesus' life and gone straight to the crucifixion? Well, because that's what Mark wants you to see. The cross is the most important part of the story for Mark. If you read the gospel, it is carried out with this frantic pace as Mark moves the story along. Immediately is his favorite word as he goes from one teaching or healing to the next one. Mark also wants us not to get distracted from the cross by other elements in the story. In the gospel, every time Jesus heals someone, he instructs them not to tell anybody. He doesn't want people to identify him principally as someone who heals physical illness. That's not his primary purpose. When he encounters those who are inhabited by demons, the demons recognize Jesus and they cry out to him, and he silences them and casts them out so they will not reveal who he is. There are some characters in the gospel who get close to identifying Jesus. Peter labels him as the Messiah, but he does not understand how the Messiah could suffer. Blind Bartimaeus encounters Jesus and calls him the Son of David, correctly identifying his royal lineage. But it is only on the cross that Jesus' identity and thus his mission is fully revealed. He's hung on the cross and he's labeled with a marker that says the King of the Jews. This is mockery, for what king mounts a cross? Look, this king cannot save himself, much less anyone else. The crowds deride him. The religious rulers mock him. The thieves crucified with him offer their words of abuse. This is as far from a sacred moment as we can imagine. We're observing an execution. How could this possibly be the revelation of God? At noon, though, the sky turns black across the land. This is a theological declaration more than a meteorological one. Darkness covering the land is associated with the day of the Lord, described by the Hebrew prophets, this day of God's great cosmic act in history. It is a sign that we are at that moment. As Jesus nears his end, he cries out in a loud voice, Mark says, as he dies. That loud cry, too, is consistent with apocalyptic prophecies, as God's voice cries out in those texts, cries out in judgment. And then you heard it, the temple veil is torn in two from top to bottom. Mark says it twice, torn in two, torn from top to bottom. He doesn't want you to miss this. It's not going to get stitched back up, that veil over the temple. Everything now has changed. God is not contained in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, but is loose out in the world. It is the death of Jesus on the cross, which is the ultimate unleashing of God's Spirit throughout the creation. It is the declaration of the ultimate power of suffering love for others. The first declaration of faith, then, the first evidence of the invasion of God's Spirit throughout all the world, comes from the centurion at the cross. This Roman soldier, a commander of 100 men, he's in charge of the crucifixion. He has seen the sky blackened. He's heard the loud cry. He has seen the temple curtain torn in two from top to bottom. At the cross, this Gentile military man is the first convert. Truly, this man was the Son of God. It's the first time a person in Mark's gospel makes that declaration. Now, the chief priests and the scribes mocked Jesus on the cross, telling him to get himself off the cross so that they could see and they could believe. The great irony is, though, that it is in not coming off the cross, but in giving his life away for the sake of God's invasion of the world, that the centurion sees and that the centurion comes to believe. It is actually not in Jesus saving himself, but in giving himself away that God's Spirit comes to take over the lives of others. The mystery of the cross, the scandal of the cross, has been the central theme and the central embarrassment of our faith. If you're trying to market your church, if you're trying to draw in new people to fill the pews and give their money each Sunday, it's hard to do that when you say, join us and you too can die for the sake of the world. Come and give yourself away as Jesus did in love for this world. That message runs counter to everything that tells me to accumulate, to accomplish, to achieve. This power of God judges all those voices that speak to me every day, driving me to work hard and earn and gain and prove that I am worthy. If Jesus is truly God's Son, who has brought the divine into our earthly existence, and if God has not been confined by our transactional religious ritual or by our political or military might, then I have to question everything. Why did I buy this house? Move into this neighborhood, send my kids to that school, work in this job, spend my money this way? If the way of suffering love that cries out from the cross is truly the ultimate power, the ultimate goal of human living, then my entire apparatus for decision-making is turned over. I'm no longer the center of my life. The cross is. And anything in me that does not align with that love must die, must be torn apart like that temple veil. We see, though, the temptation, even in the life of the church, to turn away from this emphasis on the cross. It makes more sense to us to talk about Jesus as a moral exemplar, somebody to follow. We depict him as a teacher who showed us to advocate for the poor, to love our neighbor, to encourage us on our journey. It's unpleasant to have to look at our selfishness, our addictive acquisitiveness, our commitment to personal gain, personal leisure, and personal happiness. So if we can just take Jesus off the cross, then he can be our friend who takes us, we're basically good people anyway, and so Jesus takes us, basically good people, and helps us to be a little bit better on our journey. It's like Jesus is Dr. Phil. Jesus is Dr. Oz or Dave Ramsey. Jesus, our self-help coach. Yet, the centurion correctly identifies that Jesus is the Son of God. He is ultimate truth, and that truth is revealed on a cross. The cross identifies our delusion and judges our personal obsessions. The cross awakens us to the power of God to transform the world through sacrifice and the giving away of our lives. So some of you have asked me in recent months about this processional cross that we use on occasion in worship. It's the cross that's carried in front of the choir during the opening hymn on Sunday mornings. I wrote a piece about it for the newsletter several months ago. You may have read it. You may have forgotten you read it. You may not have seen it. It was a while ago. And I've heard some concern, are we turning into a Roman Catholic church? It looks like something Catholic churches do, or a concern that this is too formal, or that it looks too militaristic to march in like an army behind this cross as a sign of dominance and victory. Let's think about symbols. They mean what we let them mean. I would ask us then, when we see that cross coming down the aisle among us and leading us then out into the world, I would ask us to see that cross as a visual reminder of our commitment to the power of suffering love that has been released beyond any sanctuary and out across the whole creation. It's a procession of irony. It's a procession of paradox. We walk with authority and power under a symbol that is not a symbol of power or might. It shows the scandal of our faith. As Methodist bishop and Duke University professor William Willimon writes, true morality, the ability to judge our own self-deception, the gift of seeing things in perspective, comes from practices outside of those sanctioned by the system. It comes from being forced Sunday after Sunday to lead and to pray the prayer of confession followed by the words of absolution. It comes from being ordered Sunday after Sunday, do this in remembrance of me. In my case, he writes, it comes from being forced Sunday after Sunday to march into church behind a cross rather than a flag, my list of publications, or my pension portfolio. The cross saves us by destroying our illusions of achievement and ego. And in being freed of that power, we are freed for a life to God. We become agents of suffering love, giving ourselves away, instruments of the continued invasion of God's grace throughout the whole creation. There must be a cross. And this cross, you hear, is not about a substitute to suffer for the sin of the world. The cross is not the satisfaction of God's wrath or an atoning sacrifice. The cross in Mark is the moment when the fullness of God is revealed and the power of God erupts through the whole creation as the temple curtain is torn. In the cross, the invasion of God is complete, and no power can stand in God's way. The centurion represents the powerful Roman Empire with all of its military strength. He confesses that Jesus is God's Son. He is taken over by this invading spirit and comes to see the way of Jesus as the eternal way of the Creator of all things. And all others who marvel at this mystery before the cross have echoed his declaration, truly this man was God's Son. They have followed that way of suffering love, bearing witness to the God who unleashes God's Spirit upon the whole earth. And so saints and martyrs, teachers and pastors, elders and deacons, the rest of the baptized have accompanied us to this place where the cross still stands before us, the ultimate mystery and revelation of God, the messianic secret revealed. Mark beckons us to respond to the power of that gospel. A darkened sky, a loud cry, the temple curtain rent in two. Does what we see lead us to believe? Will we be a people of the cross? There must be dying in order to live. There must be confession so that grace can take hold. And the unleashing of God that results from the cross will threaten everything that maintains order by systems of fear or reward. And so more crosses get erected, more attempts to silence the way of suffering love. There will always be a cross. Some will erect the cross in order to try and silence the voice of love and care and the giving away of ourselves. And some will stand at the cross and will declare, truly, this man was the Son of God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.